Do we need stronger work requirements in the federal social safety net? Some members of Congress say yes.
That work is what's going to make progress in your life possible so that you can actually live the American dream.
On this episode, we sit down with Congressman Mike Kennedy of Utah's 3rd District to discuss his legislation to boost work requirements for food stamps and housing programs. He also shares his own story about how growing up in poverty and learning the vital impact of work shapes his vision for welfare reform. You're listening to Defending Ideas. Defending Ideas is a weekly podcast produced by Sutherland Institute. On this show, we are committed to renewing the principles of common sense conservatism, making you a better champion of sound ideas. Welcome back to another episode of Defending Ideas. I'm your host, Nic Dunn, and we're talking again about upward mobility, specifically with a lot of the conversation happening in Washington, D.C. right now around potential changes to federal programs, in particular programs like food stamps, Medicaid, the various federal programs that make up the social safety net. How can we improve these programs, strengthen work at the core of them? To have this conversation, we're privileged to be joined by Representative Mike Kennedy, serving in Congress, representing Utah's 3rd Congressional District. Congressman, thanks for being with us.
Nick, thanks for having me on. Love the Sutherland Institute and all you're doing around here, and honored to be here.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. And we love our relationship with your team, our congressional delegation here in Utah. We have so many positive interactions on these important issues, so appreciate your time and your work. And really, I was excited to talk to you because you are not only trying to address issues of poverty and upward mobility from a policy lens, you have some life experiences that help inform that. So I wonder if we could start there. Could you kind of share a little bit about your background, your experiences, and kind of maybe how that informs your work now as a congressman?
Happy to do so. It's been an interesting life. I'm 56 years old. I feel like I've lived 156 years with all these different things that I've done. But for me, this Let's Get to Work Act is really interesting because I started working formally when I was 12 years old, and it's been inspiring for me to do that. I started with a job that my father found for me where I was raking leaves and cutting grass, and I grew up in Michigan, and there was a never-ending stream of leaves in the fall to rake. I remember as a kid having this job and working probably 4 to 6 hours on a Saturday raking leaves as the first start, and just bagging those leaves and pulling the bags off to an alley for trash pickup. And it was tiring. I was very exhausted by the end of that because I'd never really done anything like that besides cutting the family grass and those sort of things. And it's demoralizing as well, is that the leaves kept falling at the same time that I was raking them up and putting them in bags. And now I look back and I think, those leaves falling, there's money in my pocket. You know, the reality is the apartment landlord that I worked with, is he wanted his yards to look clean. And it was not just one house, it was many houses that he took me on for. But I'll tell you, Nick, for myself and for your listeners and for you, that started a process that taught me that hard work is what's going to get you ahead. When I was paid $5 an hour to rake leaves as a 12-year-old kid. I went on to bus tables. I went on to be a janitor. I went on to work for United Parcel Service, handling boxes. All of these were hard physical jobs. And if you want to, for me, and I've always told my children that you want to be motivated to get some education and move on to more skilled work, you might want to do hard physical labor and recognize how hard it can be for people. So for me, I come at this policy discussion in Washington, D.C. from a perspective of work has inspired me to move on with my life. I've had to do a lot of hard things that weren't just hard physical things. They're hard emotional and intellectual things, hard challenges societally. Discipline was required for many of these things, to go to medical school, to go to law school, to raise a family, to pay off our debts and so on. And we can get into all those kind of details. But for me, that started on some level when I was a 12-year-old kid that nobody would pay any attention to. But for $5 an hour raking leaves and ultimately cutting grass, and then cleaning up tables and being a janitor. And all of these things translated into a determination to live the American dream, which on some level is also ennobling in that my father is an immigrant, came to the United States and became a naturalized citizen. And my mom and dad had to work hard, and I had to work hard, and we have lived the American dream, the idea that in a first-generation American on my dad's side, that I could work in Congress for our people and for the United States of America. it's a really inspiring perspective for me to have. And I want to share that with others who, in this SNAP benefit, food stamp sort of circumstance, work is a blessing, not a curse, and we should consider it that way.
I love that framing, that work being central in a positive way. And even when you're telling that story of seeing the leaves falling down and at first being discouraged, man, I have to rake all these leaves.
Oh no!
But then being able to see it as a blessing.
Yeah, right.
That means through my effort, through my work, I can earn more. And even just as a kid, recognizing that, I want to read a section of your quote. When your office released or announced the Let's Get to Work Act, along with Senator Scott from Florida, you also have a quote in here from Representative Brackeen. I might be mispronouncing that, so correct me so we don't offend anyone. But I want to read a segment of your quote because I think it helps to capture this and ask you to expand on it. In conjunction with the release of the Let's Get to Work Act, you say, growing up receiving government assistance and working since I was 12, I know firsthand that the key to making government support truly effective is pairing it with work. So I want to just focus on that for a minute because I think often when we get into conversations about poverty and upward mobility, and especially looking at federal programs and the social safety net, it's very easy at times for those things to get controversial, for people to have robust debates, which of course we should have robust debates about policy issues. But I think sometimes what gets missed is trying to understand these issues through the lens of families actually experiencing poverty and what would actually be helpful for them. What do they actually want, and how do we kind of clear their path? So can you share whatever you're comfortable sharing just about your own background, about those experiences? What was that like, and how does that inform what you bring to the table on this issue now?
Thanks for that question, Nick, because I happened to find a job. The fact that I was on the free school lunch program at my school since starting in 7th grade all the way through 12th grade. In fact, I'll add to that. I rode the bus every day to and from school, 45 minutes one way, so 90 minutes that I spent on the bus every day. And I remember being a high school senior. It was a funny thing. I got off the bus to go back to my house as a high school senior when all my friends, my senior friends, my junior friends had abandoned the bus. I was just a guy. We didn't have a car. We didn't have a car for me to drive back and forth to work. We didn't have gas money either for that. My mom and dad divorced when I was a young teen. That's actually when I started free school lunch. And actually the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints had a welfare program as well. We received Deseret food benefits from the church. And actually, so with the free school lunches that I got at school, I happened to have a job, and that wasn't any particular policy or requirement with the government program. But with the church program, where we got pears and applesauce and hot dogs and bologna or whatever we got from the Bishop Storehouse through the church in Michigan where I grew up, is there was a requirement that we do something for the church. So we would go to clean the church. We would babysit somebody else who had a welfare need from the church. We would babysit this woman's children while she would go to work, and enable two welfare recipients to kind of help each other. And none of this was perfect, but as they received welfare from the church program, that we would give back. I went to the Bishop Storehouse as a kid to can goods that were picked in the field. I've actually worked in the fields, even as an adult, picking the produce that ultimately translated into a Bishop Storehouse opportunity for people to receive those goods at essentially a grocery store for free that people could go to. So I gave back in that volunteer time, and these kind of policies that in the government we're trying to effectuate are that kind of example where we do pair an ennobling opportunity for people to have a chance to work at the same time that they're receiving benefits. So in other words, the duplication of I do work and I receive the necessary resources so that I can live my life. I have food, I have somebody helping me with rent or mortgage. Those kind of things translate ultimately into somebody who's got skills now, and they can actually go out into the marketplace and earn a real living by doing the actual work, which is ultimately what we want to translate for people, that they're not on the government benefit program for their lives. There are some people that feel like, yeah, that's how it should be, is you receive welfare for life. I think that that's dehumanizing for people to be stuck on these programs. If they have a chance to get out of these programs, we should help them to get out of the program so they can be self-sufficient and develop that self-esteem that comes associated with that, which has been a big part of my life.
In a minute, I want to get into some more of the details of the actual proposal, the Let's Get to Work Act, and kind of have you talk through that. But before we jump into that, I want to ask, just as we sort of start having or maybe continue having this debate as a nation, around things like work requirements and the social safety net, and just the role that work plays, as you're articulating, for helping families get out of poverty. It's very easy at times for work to be treated like a punishment, like it's punitive. And I think, folks on the left side of the political aisle often speak in those terms, that work requirements are punitive, they're a punishment, you're harming people in poverty. I think sometimes even folks on the political right can sort of say, well, if you're getting something for free, you better be working as well. So there's a little bit of this broad negative connotation around work for lower income families that I think sometimes comes from all different parts of the political spectrum. But with kind of your approach and the way you articulate it in the release materials for the proposal for the legislation, and now it's a different message. No, that it's not about punishing folks. It's about empowering them. I wonder, can you articulate why that is your message? Kind of what's the connection? And I'm particularly interested in, again, your upbringing, sort of experiencing these kinds of things. When you were young, was work, did it feel like a punishment for your family? I'm even not always being sure maybe where food money was going to come from. Just talk about that intersection of your ability to say, well, I've experienced some of this, and here's how it informs why work needs to be even more central than it is right now.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think back to those days. 7th grade, I was probably 13 or 14 years old. And in the town that I lived in, I would actually finish school and then walk. It was probably a 30 to 40-minute walk from my school to the workplace, because I lived in a rural area, the 45-minute bus ride. And that walk alone was something that gave me a sort of physicality, a sort of stamina. And as a doctor, I can think of what must have been happening to me at that time that I didn't really think about, but I was getting stronger. In fact, I would walk to work, and then from work, and this is to the beyond the raking of leaves to the grass cutting, is I would cut the lawn, $5 a lawn essentially, that I would do, $20 for lawns throughout the town that I lived in, and $5 a lawn. And he didn't even pay me. He didn't pay me for the time to push the lawnmower all over town. So the physicality of walking from school to the work site and then gassing up the lawnmower and cutting the lawn that I was at, and then walking another 10 or 15 minutes up to the next lawn to mow, and then going back to the place that I start, gassing up again and walking to the next place, which is about 20 minutes away. And then about 30 minutes away was the last lawn that I would cut. So there was a certain amount of strength that was coming to me. And even in the hot summer months, there were no water bottles back in those days. I'd have to find a hose to get some water if I needed that. I didn't have a water bottle. I didn't even think of that sort of thing. I just had a gallon jug of water in the garage where I started that I could water back up. But there's a certain amount of discipline that came through that. And it was very satisfying to get my $20 and stick it in the bank. And when I saw my mom and dad struggling with money, to have a little bit of security as I watched my bank account in a small fashion. I mean, you're talking, I had $100 in there, $120, and it was just a little bank account. I was really proud of the fact that I could put my money in the bank and save it so that then when the school year started, I would go and buy my own clothes to start off the school year. And I would translate my sweat equity into things that I felt like I needed, like the new clothing for school. So that direct translation of that capitalistic approach to things, it actually taught me a great deal of discipline, and it also taught me the value of my time and my capacity physically. And I was getting grades at school that didn't really pay off for me until later. But the fact that I could translate my hard work into something like clothing that I felt like I needed for school was an opportunity for me to see on a microcosm level, this is what an American economy looks like when people are ready to work. And this is, I'll tell you, Nick, for my adult experience working campaigns and all that sort of things, I've met some remarkable people in the state of Utah, people that on a microscopic level for themselves, they've experienced the same thing. And I think of various people that are multimillionaires and even billionaires now that came to this country from foreign countries. And the one I'm thinking of particularly came with $20 in his pocket to the state of Utah, and now is a massive philanthropist for this state, and a notable name who has done really well for himself. And it's because in the United States of America, if you're willing to be honest, if you're willing to work hard and be disciplined and translate that work using your brain and your brawn to translate that into something more, that you can succeed in this country. Whereas other countries, if you're not born in the right family, or if you're not in the right caste, or however you might look at it, you'll never have a chance. You will always stay at a certain level. So I think these programs that Senator Scott and myself are trying to promote with the SNAP benefits is something that would give people that vision, that personal vision on a personal level that they can actually succeed. And let me clarify on a few points behind the bill. So we're talking about able-bodied adults. So if you're disabled, you are excluded from the requirements associated with this. You can receive SNAP benefits if you're disabled, and that disability is declared by a doctor. So there's a classification scheme. People see their doctor and they've got various disabilities that might qualify them in that circumstance, and they can receive SNAP benefits without the work requirement. If you have dependent children that are less than school-aged opportunities, then you also are excluded from this. So a single mother with children in the home that can't go to school, then that mother is excluded. She can receive the SNAP benefits. So as a fellow who grew up in a single mother home, my dad continued to be involved in our family. I know how compellingly difficult it is for some of these people. I've lived in poverty. So when people come, it's been very interesting, Nick, for me to be in the public eye. And I've done this for over a decade now. But people look at they perceive me as a rich white doctor guy who's got all the privilege of society. And if you went back to look at me and my family when I was 5 and 10 and 15 years old, you would not see somebody with a bunch of privilege. Now, people can ascribe whatever privilege to me that they want, but I worked really hard in school to kind of keep up with stuff. I worked really hard in these jobs, the various jobs that I've had. And as a result, I've learned that if I'm willing to put in the effort, that there's a reward out there waiting for me. And I want other people to have that same opportunity, because the other side of it is that if they can't see that they have any value inherent to themselves, that they don't have a skill set, and that they're only capable of receiving benefits just by the mere fact that they're humans and in this country, there's a certain dependency that's fostered by that, and a lack of motivation or capacity. And I've seen that as well. And it's the sort of thing that we want to prevent happening in people's lives when they're just waiting for the next check to show up. There are people out there that's all they can do, and I know them well. And I also recognize through my own family how challenging these things can be. But I also recognize everybody should live to the best of their potential wherever possible. And then otherwise, we as a United States citizenry should back up and help those people that don't have capacity, like the single mother who's got dependent children in the home that can't go to school. We want to help that mother until the point all the children are in school. Well, okay, Mom, now it's time for, let's see what we can do to help you find a job. And the interesting thing, Nick, on that finally is you don't even have to have a job. You have to look for a job. You can volunteer your time as well. That's part of this bill, is that it's not that you have to go out to the salt mines and do terrible labor. This is, there's a lot of flexibility associated with this. It's going to promote work in a healthy fashion and help people see the vision that work is what's going to make progress in your life possible so that you can actually live the American dream.
I love that. And there's something I want to sort of focus on for a moment, because it really stands out to me that as you tell your story and as you articulate the goal and the intent behind the Let's Get to Work Act, kind of what I'm hearing come out is that in your own experiences, experiencing poverty when you were younger with your family, obviously there were helpful resources to help kind of stabilize your family when you were in need. But what I'm hearing over and over again is sort of this, when we were poor, thank goodness for work. Thank goodness for the blessing it was to be able to work. And you've also kind of maybe implicitly articulated the non-financial benefits of work. Our friends over at the Georgia Center for Opportunity, another great policy organization we work very closely with here at Sutherland, have done phenomenal research on the non-financial benefits of work. And it's what you're saying, that it's not just a paycheck. Yes, earning a paycheck is something different in a positive way than maybe getting even that same dollar amount through government transfer programs. The earned success of those dollars is different, but it's something deeper. It's something about what it teaches you, what it equips you and empowers you to do, that I think it's just worth highlighting, is that in your life, it seems like the safety net, yes, aspects of the social safety net were important and essential and helpful, but it was because they sort of oriented you towards the importance of work, and that's what was the blessing was. Thank goodness we had work opportunities that we could use that to work our way up and out of poverty.
Excellent point, because a lot of the skills that I have as an adult that are vital for me to do the things that I've done are translated into these little lessons that I received as a child. For example, just that circumstance where I had to walk to work and then start to work and go through the average day with on some level deprivation. I was not really well attended to by my employer as far as water and food, and I just kind of had to discipline my way through that process. But I learned through that the discipline necessary to accomplish. I mean, you can imagine the amount of medical school intellectual work associated with trying to memorize all of the muscles and bones in the body and all the nerves and how they're innervating those muscles and how we see and hear and talk and how the brain works. It takes a lot of discipline and concentration for that. In addition, the capacity that I developed for a deferred benefit. In other words, I was willing to go through hours worth of work to at some point get a paycheck is something that was really important to me. Is I spent 4 years in medical school, 3 years in residency before I finally got a real paycheck as a professional, 7 years post-college before I finally got a paycheck. And I was able to recognize that some of these things you invest now and you'll get payback, but it's not coming for a while. And you need to be willing to be patient on those kind of deferred gains that might come. And in fact, same with the house, buying a house and paying off our loans. We had massive student loans from medical school. At the same time, we were trying to buy a house and pay off a mortgage. And my wife and I, through financial discipline, recognizing she also comes out of poverty and her dad also left her mother. We're both children of divorce, my wife and I. And I'm proud to say we've been married 32 years with 8 children and 10 grandchildren. And we have demonstrated to each other and to our family that from not so ideal circumstances, whether it be financial or socially and emotional and relationship wise, that you can make a better life for yourself, but it's really a matter of your decisions, that marriages don't have to fall apart. People can be honorable to each other. They can actually pay off. In our case, we paid off our 30-year house mortgage in 15 years. At the same time, we were paying off 20 years medical school debt in 10 years. Those were concordant, that we were paying those off while we were raising in medical school and residency, and subsequent to that, we were raising 8 children, which people routinely say, I can't afford to do X, Y, and Z. And I understand it's a tough world, but I also understand that if you're willing to be careful about how you go about things, there are a great deal of opportunities. And those are lessons that in an aggregate come from each little effort that I had as a child, that I was going to go walk to work and make a little bit of money instead of sitting at home playing video games or watching television or going to my friend's house and potentially not doing great things. Like my friend got into shoplifting he thought that was pretty funny to steal stuff from the store and then just throw it in the ditch as he was walking out because it's just for the adventure. And I knew, Nick, that those things weren't right, that was not a healthy way to approach things. And so again, when people look at me in a later middle-aged circumstance, that guy's just had everything handed to him, is, well, if you'd like to come back with me to the really devastating circumstances that I grew up in, and it could have been worse, I'll certainly admit that, is you might have seen another perspective. And when people claim that I don't have empathy or interest in those that are impoverished and struggling, the divorced and suffering, the immigrants, I have a deep empathy for those people. I've lived with them. I've been them in many ways, and I want to help them. So it's interesting to watch the characterization that some people have for public figures, and I think it's unfair, and I think we should all give each other a little bit of leeway, because everybody comes from a position of trouble, and when we're willing to work with each other and understand, I think it's much more likely we'll get to a better place for all of us.
It's incredibly powerful to me to hear it articulated that way, and I love sort of the connection between the lived experiences and sort of the principles you draw from that, and how it affects your approach to public policy. And maybe just for the benefit of our audience, can you give just a quick summary of the Let's Get to Work Act? What does it do? Why do you think it's necessary? Why is this a better step forward to address these issues and empower families?
SNAP benefits currently, and the SNAP stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, is that it used to be called food stamps. So it's essentially a credit card with a certain allocation of money depending on your income level and the number of children that you have, for example, that people can receive to help them with food support. So, and the program deserves some adjustments on multiple fronts. Right now, you can buy the number one purchase benefit on SNAP is soda, which is a terrible idea. As a doctor, the idea that the number one purchased item on SNAP is soda and subsequent to that is candy this is not positive. And the idea that we're going to push our impoverished individuals into these less than ideal nutritional choices is probably a really bad idea. My bill does not address that. There's another bill that's looking at those kind of things. But right now, those SNAP benefits are not dependent on any sort of criteria outside of your income level and the number of children that you have. You can receive them for as long as the federal government's willing to give those without any obligation. And so what Senator Scott and myself are seeking to do, and Josh Burkeen as well, is we're trying in these circumstances to insert requirements that are actually going to ennoble these people, inspire these people to move on from these federal programs and actually take care of these things themselves. Because frankly, if somebody is earning their own money and buying their own food, they can get what they want and subsequently have that rehumanizing or inspiring and ennobling aspect of I work and I receive instead of I wait and I get naturally without any sort of effort. So, and then these exceptions that are put in, I think, are acknowledging the fact that not everybody really can get out there and do the kind of work that we would want them to do. And in those cases, we want to make sure that we're providing people the necessary means so that nobody's going hungry in this country. So I think it does strike a balance that we're actually inspiring people at the same time we're helping where we need to, where those that can't do for themselves are given support.
I want to mention a couple of the bullet points and the release, and we'll link to this in the show notes so folks can go read through this for themselves as well. But some of the key points that you outlined for this legislation, it ends the current suspension of SNAP's work requirements for able-bodied adults without dependents that you mentioned earlier. It expands the existing SNAP work requirements to able-bodied adults aged 50 to 59 and to parents of children over 6 years old. A couple other things worth mentioning. It also addresses work requirements for housing programs, for the HUD voucher programs. I think you already mentioned exempts parents with children under the age of 6 and people who care for incapacitated individuals. So I just wanted to run through those quick bullets. Any additional context that our listeners ought to be aware of kind of why those specific interventions or maybe equip our listeners to have some talking points if they hear people criticizing work requirements?
We value mothers and fathers helping children in the home. The idea that children should all be kind of in daycare or an institution of some sort is a reflection of we do not want to disable the family from being able to take care of their children if they choose so to do. In addition to family members, the reality behind if you're caring for somebody who's disabled, that you can still receive your benefits and give that kind of care. We in the United States of America value moms and dads helping their children. We value families helping those in their family that are disabled. That, you can imagine, saves our country multitudes of dollars. At the same time, the love and support the families should give to each other is actually protected. So that's an aspect to this bill. I think that's really important. In addition, just to the fact that we focus on the able-bodied adult. So if you have some sort of disability, then you're going to be exempted from the requirements associated with the hope at some point that all people will have an opportunity to give back to society on whatever level that they can. So I'm a big fan of recognizing that it's a complicated world out there for many people. And in this case, I think the bill does a nice job striking that balance.
What do you hope will be the impact? Is it that a higher rate of families on the food stamp program, on SNAP, will be working, or their work rates will increase, they'll work more hours? Anything in mind that, if this passes and gets implemented in some form, do you think, well, this is what I hope to see happen in the coming years from this change?
Two things. One is that people are able to see that they have an opportunity to work, and that's actually more fun than just waiting for these benefits to show up and watching TV or whatever they do during the day. The other thing is there are people abusing the program at this point. We know that. We also know that through Medicaid, that there's abuse throughout the country of how these programs work. And in this case, if somebody really should not be on SNAP benefits, then we would like them to move on to other things instead of taking the federal taxpayer dollar. The reality for we as Republicans, we're pro-family, we're pro-work, we are pro-legal immigration. We want people to come here to this country in a legal fashion. But we are, if somebody is inappropriately receiving benefits, we are also pro-taxpayer and pro-citizen. We want to make sure we're taking care of our financial house, keeping it in order. And with $36 trillion of debt, we are not doing a good job with that. So that's another aspect to this, is if people don't qualify for these benefits, if they do have a capacity to work and they don't want to, their benefits should be terminated, and inspired by that, hopefully to get out and get a job, because there are jobs available out there if they're willing to look.
I want to broaden the lens for a minute, because most of this we're talking about essentially ways to more effectively encourage or incentivize work for these families. And again, you've done a great job articulating here are the benefits of work being central. And I've said on this show many times, and we've talked a lot about here at Sutherland Institute, that there really is no true path out of poverty that does not involve sustained engagement with work. But I also want to kind of broaden the lens to some of the other aspects of the social safety net. One of our big focuses here at Sutherland right now is trying to address work disincentives that are kind of inadvertently built into the safety net. A big thing we've been talking about is benefits cliffs, where earning a little bit more if you're on these programs can trigger a disproportionately larger loss of government benefits, to where a lot of families actually think that work does not pay. And in fact, our research that we've done here at Sutherland found that in Utah, we surveyed statewide families on the safety net here in Utah, or recent participants, and found that 43% of them said that at some point they had intentionally constrained their income,
drawn back,
because they were worried about triggering a benefit cliff. So 43% is a pretty eye-opening number to me, that there's a real fear of, well, me working harder doesn't actually make my family better off, sometimes makes my family worse off. Can you talk about that? Have you experienced it? Have you seen it? What's your perspective on that particular area of potential reform for the
Absolutely. It's a great point, is we need to make sure that we are, in a sliding scale fashion, still supporting people and not cutting them off immediately as soon as $1 more is made beyond the current standard that they have. So the idea that we saw that during COVID with the expanded unemployment benefits, that people were making more on unemployment than they could going out in the market. And they stayed on those programs as long as they could, worsening our national debt and disabling these people from doing the kind of work that they should do. So for us as a government generally, and policymakers specifically for the legislature, we should respect that aspect to this. So I'll point to Medicaid as an example, which I've had 2 or 3 children. I have to check to make sure, but 3 children on Medicaid. So I've also been a recipient of Medicaid as a student. It was a big support to us. And as a doctor working with my patients, I know Medicaid recipients by name. I know these families. I've taken care of them for 20 plus years. And I love these people and I want to help them. I don't want these programs to be damaging to them. So number one, we preserve the programs in the fashion that's going to be most supportive for people. And if that means that as somebody makes a little bit more than the cutoff point, we still give them the benefit. We may ask them for a little bit of a higher premium amount. And this is where I'll just say, Nick, and I think Sutherland and others like us respect this. The states in their capacity to innovate, this is where the activity is. The federal government paints with a broad brush. It is too large, and often instead of a scalpel, it's using the meat cleaver sort of circumstance. The one-size-fits-all approach of the federal government does not allow innovation. And many of these programs, if you talk about SNAP and Medicaid as an example, is that these are federal-state coalitions, and we need to empower the states to have the innovative capacity to execute on different aspects of these considerations. And when it comes to if you're going to earn more money and your Medicaid benefits might be jeopardized, even though your SNAP benefits would continue, that the state should consider that and allow these people to continue to receive Medicaid benefits until they are fully ingrained in their work circumstance. Now they got an employer-sponsored plan that's actually much better than Medicaid, and we've the bird has left the nest and hasn't crashed onto the ground and broken its wings as a result. We've been able to empower these people to live in the way that's going to allow them to be more satisfied and actually more fulfilled as they go through their lives. So those benefit cliffs that people can run into, it's a big problem, and I think our states are better suited to be more nuanced in their approach to this. So I'll just finish this piece in saying I want Utah to be bigger and the Washington, D.C. crowd to be smaller. I think we try to do too much in Washington, D.C. with HUD housing, in this case food stamp benefits or SNAP benefits, Medicaid. We're not doing a great job being innovative. And I believe that when we empower states to do things for their citizens, not only are they more accountable, they're actually more accurate in executing the policies in a way that helps people better.
That touches on a number of important themes that are, again, central to here at Sutherland. We have something called the Work and Opportunity Initiative, which is all about this. It's really about identifying and addressing any barriers or disincentives to work that families experience, especially those families trying to get out of poverty. And kind of the way I would characterize, or the way I would articulate this principle, is that encouraging and incentivizing work is vital. We have to kind of elevate work just in the culture, the way we talk about how families can escape poverty and work requirements, as you've articulated. You view that's a really helpful way to do that. I would also then say, well, on the other side of the coin, we also have to clear their path. Like if we're pushing them more towards work, yes, encouraging work is a good thing. We need to do it. But also we need to make sure that we're kind of not inadvertently pushing them off a cliff, so to speak.
That, right on. Because so I'll just say complicated circumstance being a doctor. So when I graduated from my residency, came to Utah, and was trying to be a doctor. I had to take a state exam for opioid prescribing. That exam cost, if I remember right, as many years ago, was $50 or $100, and I had no money. I was a law student at the time with 5 children, and so they took $50 from me there. The state license cost $250, and then I had to do my continuing medical education, which costs X number of dollars every year that I have to pay for that. For these courses, doctors are not cashiers at a grocery store. I get it. But there are a lot of regulations that the government has set up in an effort to, for example, a food handler's permit, so that people know to wash their hands when they're making your hamburger, and making sure they're not contaminating it. Some of this can be good, but who's paying for the food handler's permit associated with that, which can be relatively cheap and easy to get through internet? But what if somebody doesn't have the internet, or what if they don't have $20 to take the food handler permit, or whatever it is? So as a state, and this goes back to state innovations, is if we have somebody who's actually trying to get their feet under themselves and they're trying to go get that job, but they don't know how to generate a resume to make themselves look good. They don't have a tie and a sport coat or a dress that would be adequate for the interview. They don't even know how to do an interview. Are there ways for us to enable these people so that they have a higher degree of likelihood for success? Absolutely. And I've seen that with Governor Cox and the state of Utah. Generally, is there a lot of programs out there to help people that when they are not sure exactly how to do these things, that they can clear the way for them so that they're more likely to be successful? Absolutely, we should do that, because many of these people, the reason why they're struggling is they've never gained those skills, and their generational poverty, nobody in their families ever gained these skills. So the idea that we can clear the runway for these people to have a chance to take off, absolutely, we should do that. And there are a multitude of opportunities for us to make that better for these people. Once again, I don't think the federal government's very well suited for that. It doesn't do a good job with these things. There are too many states and too many different circumstances. So for the federal government to allow states more flexibility associated with these programs, at the same time being responsible for taxpayer dollars. In other words, we don't want states, and we do see states abusing these dollars. We want states to be accountable to the federal government, but my effort would be to more block grant those dollars to states with some parameters for performance, and then let the states clear the runway for these people and then be accountable to the people.
One last question on sort of the state flexibility, because that features strongly in our report on benefits cliffs. That's one of the recommendations, is either block grants or more waivers being approved or things like that. But when you're looking at this issue kind of through the lens of your role in Congress, what do you want to see more of from states on this issue? And I look at it in terms of everything you're saying, that yes, it should be pro-work and fiscally responsible. But if we can have states have more empowerment to be able to maybe try innovative pilots, maybe even address the phase out of benefit programs in a different way to try and eliminate cliffs? What kinds of things do you think would be most helpful?
What I think is really interesting is when we give more flexibility is the big boys and big girls in our country are going to have to put on their big boy and big girl pants. What that means is that, for example, I'll go to Medicaid, which I know quite well because I've lived in that environment, is it's a 70% federal, 30% state payment process. What if at some point it is moving to 50-50? And as a result, and in the states, when I say things like that, states have serious concerns because right now, and on Obamacare, it's 90-10. Federal pays 90 and the state pays 10%. So that gets to be complicated. And the circumstance would be, yeah, we're going to give you more flexibility and we're going to actually expect you to fund these programs instead of us at the same time that we're cutting your taxes. See, this is where I think, and I suspect you and many of your listeners will think as well, we're unbalanced in how we do these things. We've drawn this into a United State of America instead of United States of America. At the beginning, the states, to remind you of things that you already know and your listeners to think about it from my perspective, is the states created the federal government, not the other way around. And the federal government has become the dominant player in all of our politics and all of our programs. And that is probably short-sighted in the form of United States of America with the big capital of one big, huge state being Washington, D.C. There's 435 reps and 100 senators and a president. I represent 850,000 people. It's hard for us to get to the details of how these programs can and should work when you're talking about housing and clothing and health caring these individuals. And so for us to rebalance in the form of we're going to cut your taxes. So state, if you feel like you need to raise your taxes, then you can be accountable to your people to raise those taxes and effectuate these programs that ultimately are going to translate into more nuanced approaches. Yes, it will be a patchwork quilt of solutions for these complicated programs, but let's be honest, Louisiana is not the same as Utah, not the same as New York City, not the same as Alabama. Is each city in each county, each state is going to have some circumstances, and as a state legislator myself, I was always really interested in, even on the state level, not telling counties and cities what to do, is we should cut your taxes and let the people make these decisions, because I know where my mayor of my town lives. I can go to her house. I could say hi to her at the local parade or local community event. I see her at the grocery store. Good luck seeing the President of the United States at any of those places, because you're not going to be able to talk to them. Your senator represents in this state 3.5 million people. It's hard to get an audience with people that represent almost, in my case, 1 million people. But I do. I love seeing the people, and I try to talk to them personally about these things. But it's just a lot of people to talk to. But when we have cities and counties and states taking account for these kind of programs, we are going to do a better job at addressing the individual needs. And this gets me to the final point maybe here, is I think our families and our churches and our communities are better suited to do these programs than are these programs that are in a federal circumstance where a bureaucrat that never sees these people is making the decisions about how these programs work. So if I can empower my local citizenry to do these things, that's really, I think, the best place for these things to happen.
I love the articulation of the principle of federalism, and I agree wholeheartedly that policy innovation best happens at the state level. And so whatever we can do, again, within responsible frameworks, for states to be empowered to be innovative in improving the social safety net, I think that'd go a long way. And also your articulation of our civic institutions, families, faith organizations, faith communities, even just the private business sector. I think those things get left out too often in our conversations about poverty and upward mobility, that it really is the civic fabric of the country that we ought to think about as the first and foremost safety net or really launch pad to success. So I love those principles. We've got just a couple of minutes left, so kind of my last question is sort of a two-parter. What's next for the Let's Get to Work Act in the 119th Congress, or what's next for the general efforts of welfare reform, strengthening upward mobility, and even beyond this Congress? Kind of what's your bigger vision for improving the social safety net to improve the prospects of these families who are hungry for it?
Republicans are at this point working on budget reconciliation, which you may have heard about, and it's nuanced and complicated and kind of a creature of Washington, D.C. politics. But basically what it allows the Republican Party, which of course has the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives at this point, with a 51 senator vote to move policy forward as long as it's related to the budget. And what we're particularly focused on right now is making sure that every taxpayer in this country does not have a significant increase in their taxes at the end of this year. We're promoting the 2017 Trump tax cuts. We want to make sure that those are made permanent or made as long as possible, the 10-year window that we're looking at. So our first objective is to make sure that happens. Why? Because when people have money in their pocket, they can do with it as they see fit instead of Washington, D.C. taking that money, which is everybody that's a taxpayer will get a tax increase at the end of this year if we don't move this budget reconciliation package forward. Of course, we also know President Trump is focused on no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and he's talking about no tax on purchasing of vehicles. And I think this only can go so far, but I am a big fan of cutting taxes wherever we can because it does empower the people to the disempowering of Washington, D.C. One of the reasons why Washington has so much power is because it takes a lot of money from a lot of people, and that money translates into opportunities to force people to do things that they may or may not do themselves. So in my case, I'm very supportive of promoting those Trump tax cuts. And when it comes to the Let's Get to Work Act, which is only one part of many components of the pro-family, pro-work, pro-low taxes, pro-local control Republican Party that I'm a part of and I'm proud to be a part of, is we need to make sure that this reconciliation package happens. And we're hoping to translate that in the next month to some form that we can get the Senate and the House united and the president can sign on that. From there, we want to make sure that the states are empowered. As a state legislator myself, I entirely agree and know individually, and I'm friends with so many from our governor, lieutenant governor, all the way through the House and the Senate on the state legislature in the state of Utah. These are smart, good people. Whatever mischaracterization about politicians there are, a lot of these people care deeply about their communities. To their detriment, they're running in these public positions. And I, as a congressman, want to make sure Washington, D.C. is smaller and Utah is bigger, and its governor and the state legislature are more powerful and able to do these things in the way that Utah, which we work together to solve problems, the way Utah does things. And that's we work together to solve things. We take care of each other in this state, whether or not we agree with all the policies. So to me, that's a big focus of the Republican Party. And I think you're seeing that from the president all the way down, is empowering states to take action on their own. And if we can transform this, I think ultimately we'll see more of a healthy approach where Washington, D.C. is actually not pushing people around or puppetizing them as much as they have over the past generation or two. So I'm proud to be a part of that, and would love to continue the conversation with you and those that you represent as we move forward on these issues.
Well, Congressman, we'll have to have you back because I feel like we just skimmed the surface on a lot of these things, but really amazing articulation of the principles, again, of work, the civic institutions, and some things we can do as a country and as a state to move these issues forward. So thank you so much for your work on these issues, and thanks for being here with us on Defending Ideas.
Love to be back at any point, so let's keep the conversation going, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, once again, that was Representative Mike Kennedy from Utah's 3rd Congressional District. We're going to take one final break before we leave you with some quick talking points. This is Defending Ideas. We'll be right back.
Sometimes it's hard to keep up with the latest policy debate that affects your life. The solution? Subscribe to Sutherland Institute's weekly newsletter, where you'll find in-depth insights from seasoned policy experts, compelling multimedia, and advance notice of special events. Visit sutherlandinstitute.org.
Welcome back. Reforming federal welfare programs like food stamps, housing, and many others often prompts a lot of debate and disagreement. But I think our conversations about these issues would actually be a lot more constructive if we remind ourselves and each other about what our broad guiding principles are. I've said often that the broad goal of the safety net should be to provide temporary help stabilizing families who experience tough times, while equipping them to move into work-based self-reliance. Here are 3 guiding principles that I think will help us live up to that goal as a state and nation. Number 1, work is a blessing, not a punishment. Too often, voices on both the left and the right talk about work in negative terms, as if it's a punishment or a burden for families striving to escape poverty, when in reality, one of the most consistent factors that correlates with escaping poverty is full-time year-round work. A sustained connection with work empowers families striving for self-reliance, and our policy reforms ought to reflect that. Number 2, While we encourage and incentivize sustained engagement with work, we also have to get rid of any obstacles that may disincentivize work for struggling families, like benefits cliffs, something we've talked about a lot on this show. Removing anything that may prompt a family to believe that working harder and earning more just doesn't pay off is an essential component of a pro-work reform vision for the social safety net. And number 3, we should lean into one of the greatest assets in our constitutional structure, the laboratories of innovation known as states. Empowering states to be the innovators on everything from fixing benefits cliffs to improving outcomes of our workforce programs to broader ways to more efficiently and effectively help Americans escape poverty and achieve the American dream is an important step toward building a safety net for the 21st century. That's it for this episode of Defending Ideas. If you enjoyed this discussion, please visit defendingideas.org, where you can access previous episodes and watch or listen on your favorite platform. Don't forget to subscribe to Defending Ideas on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you like to get your shows. And please share this episode on your own social media profiles or with a friend, family member, or coworker who may find it interesting. And lastly, if you want to support the broad work of Sutherland Institute, if you want more conversations like this, please make a contribution at sutherlandinstitute.org/donate. Thanks again for joining us on Defending Ideas from the Sutherland Institute in Salt Lake City. I'm Nic Dunn. We'll see you next time.